The word landed at a dinner table, not in a scream but in a calm, practiced voice, the kind designed to end conversations before they become inconvenient. My stepsister looked directly at me, arms loosely folded, expression composed, and said I was toxic. That she wanted me gone. So I left. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't outline everything she'd overlooked for the past 3 years. I picked up my jacket, said nothing, and walked to my car. The drive home took 11 minutes. I timed it without meaning to, a habit from years of working with precision. 7 days later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her first voicemail lasted 40 seconds. Her second one, 7 seconds. Just her breathing and a clipped, sharp "call me back." By the time I listened to them all in sequence, I could chart the exact moment panic replaced entitlement. My name is Renata. I'm 37, and I work in healthcare compliance, reviewing documentation systems, auditing billing accuracy, catching the gaps that cost hospitals money or patients dignity. It requires a specific kind of patience, the ability to sit with uncomfortable information and not react until you understand the full shape of it. I didn't realize until recently how much that skill had been governing my personal life too. My father died when I was 9. My mother remarried within 4 years. He was steady enough, my stepfather, not unkind. Exactly, but occupying space in the way furniture does. His daughter, Priya, was 2 years younger than me, and arrived in our household already knowing how to read a room for advantage. I don't say that bitterly. It's simply what I observed, the way I'd observe anything. I was the one who didn't cause friction. I did well in school, built my credentials, kept my finances clean and separate. Independence wasn't something I chose so much as something I arrived at because no one was fighting me for it. I assumed that was enough to maintain equilibrium. Then my grandmother died, and everything rearranged itself. She left me her apartment, a 2-bedroom in a neighborhood that had gotten quieter and nicer over the decades. It wasn't large, but it was solid. It smelled like cedar and afternoon light. She'd told me once that a space should hold you without demanding anything in return. When she signed it over to me in her will, I understood it as exactly that, a gift of stability, something tethered to no one's expectations but mine. For about 6 months I held it. Then Priya's finances collapsed. A relationship that had been her primary support evaporated. A freelance business she'd started never found traction. And somehow my mother's solution materialized as a single sentence. The apartment's just sitting there. I said yes. I told myself it was temporary. I believed it. That was 3 years before the dinner. In the beginning, it looked like generosity between people who understood the stakes. She moved in. I covered utilities as a buffer while she stabilized. But stabilization has a way of becoming a lifestyle when no one enforces a transition. Months became a year. A year became 2. The conversations about timelines got vaguer, then disappeared. My name appeared on repair requests without being asked first. Small costs routed themselves back to me through my mother, framed as temporary, always temporary. I noticed the shift in language before I named what it meant. Priya stopped using words like if or eventually. She used we when discussing the apartment as though we shared ownership. At family dinners, my financial stability was referenced the way people reference good weather, as a given condition, not an earned outcome. Then the engagement happened. I won't say the wedding planning was the breaking point because that framing gives it too much importance. It was more like the moment a shape I'd been half seeing for years finally resolved into something I couldn't pretend was blurry. The costs floated into our conversations casually, attached to nothing, until I realized they were attached to me. My mother smoothed things over. She's just excited. You know how weddings are. You're in a position to help. The dinner was my mother's idea. A family gathering, no agenda, just a meal. When I arrived, Priya's future in-laws were seated at the table, and the energy in the room had the particular density of a prepared presentation. She outlined the wedding, not as a request but as a plan that had already been decided. Venue, aesthetic, numbers. When she turned to me, her expression held the same expectation I'd been trained to meet for 3 years. I said I was glad to contribute, but that I couldn't be responsible for the whole thing. I said I had limits. Someone across the table made a remark about what must be easy for a woman in my position. My stepfather mentioned family loyalty. My mother's face went carefully neutral. And then Priya, with a calm that mirrored my own, called me toxic. Said it like a verdict. Said it like the conversation was over. I looked around the table. No one disagreed. I picked up my jacket and left. I didn't sleep that night, but not from hurt, more from the clarity that comes when you finally stop arguing with what you've known for a long time. My brain ran through every version of that dinner, every smoothed-over conversation, every cost that had migrated silently into my column. Not in anger. In accounting. The following morning I started writing things down, not a grievance list, just an honest inventory. What I'd been subsidizing, for how long, and what amounts. I hadn't done it before because doing it would have required me to stop calling it generosity. I called Marcus 4 days later. He's an attorney I'd crossed paths with, through work, calm, precise, no interest in drama. We sat across from each other in his office on a Wednesday afternoon, and I explained the situation the same way I'd explain a compliance issue. He nodded through most of it. There was nothing complicated about the legal reality. The apartment was mine. No lease, no formal arrangement, just an informal agreement that had been allowed to persist. He walked me through the steps, a formal notice, a timeline, nothing aggressive, nothing punitive. Process. I left his office and sat in my car for a long time. I kept thinking about my grandmother's face, the way she had a particular look when she thought someone was settling for less than they were worth. I don't know if she could have anticipated this specific situation, but I know she wouldn't have been surprised by it. That evening I followed the process Marcus had outlined. A notice was drafted, reviewed, signed. I dropped it at the post office near my apartment without ceremony. It felt exactly as mundane as mailing a utility payment. On the drive home I noticed the tension I'd been carrying between my shoulder blades had shifted, not gone, but changed in quality. Less like resistance, more like resolution. 3 days later, the calls started. I was reheating dinner when my phone lit up. I let it go to voicemail. Then again. By the time I answered, she'd called 7 times in 20 minutes. Her voice had lost all of its dinner table composure. Why did I get an eviction notice? She didn't say hello. The panic in her question was raw in a way her confidence never had been. I could hear voices in the background, my mother, I thought, maybe my stepfather. All of them suddenly very present, very invested. I leaned against my kitchen counter and let a second pass before answering. The arrangement was always temporary, I said. I gave formal notice. She said it had to be a mistake. She said my mother had told her I'd calm down, that I was being emotional. That word again. I noticed it the same way I notice a discrepancy in a billing document. There's no mistake, I said. My voice was even. The timeline is in the notice. The calls didn't stop. They came in cycles, confusion giving way to anger, giving way to bargaining. My mother called 2 days later, her voice held carefully steady. She said we were family and could talk through this. I asked her one question. Was I family at that dinner? She didn't answer. I told her I'd honored the timeline in the notice and that was the extent of what I owed at this point. They came to my door 4 days after that, all 3 of them. I looked through the peephole before opening it. Priya stood closest, arms folded, jaw set. My mother stood slightly behind her. My stepfather stood at the edge like a man who understood he was present but couldn't decide whether to be invested. I opened the door but didn't invite anyone in. Priya said I had embarrassed the family. Said I had done it out of spite. You asked me to leave, I said. I left. I didn't realize that came with conditions. That's not the same thing and you know it, she said. You were comfortable, I replied. There's a real difference. My mother said Priya hadn't meant it the way it sounded, that people say things in moments of frustration, that I shouldn't let one word define everything. I nodded. And the consequences of words are real regardless of the intention behind them. My stepfather cleared his throat. You don't actually need the income, he said. You're doing well. Why make this harder than it needs to be? That sentence did something the others hadn't. It finally said plainly what had always been implied, that my needs were negotiable because my situation was stable, that my ownership was conditional on my convenience to others. I looked at him and felt something in me become completely still. This isn't about need, I said. It's about what belongs to me and whether I get to decide what happens with it. Priya's expression shifted. Then, as though she'd retrieved it from storage, she said it again. You're being toxic. I didn't flinch. Toxic people, I said quietly, don't let family live rent-free for 3 years in apartments they inherited. No one spoke for a moment. My mother's expression moved through several things quickly. My stepfather looked at the floor. Where are we supposed to go? Priya asked. Her voice had dropped. The certainty had left it entirely. That, I said, is the question you should have been asking 3 years ago. She tried several approaches after that, apology, then accusation, then apology again, each one sounding like the previous draft of a message she kept revising. I told her the timeline in the notice would be honored and that nothing else needed to be negotiated. They left without an incident, which is the most accurate description I have. The final day, I stayed in my car across the street. I watched them load boxes. Priya put the key on my hood without looking at me, her hand resting there a second longer than necessary. They drove away. I didn't feel righteous. I felt the particular relief of a weight that's been so familiar it stopped registering as weight, until it was gone. I had the apartment repainted and repaired within 2 weeks. New tenants moved in the following month, found through a property manager, vetted properly, paying a fair rate. The first rent payment arrived on a Tuesday morning. Unremarkable, predictable, clean. My family has not reached out since. I've spent a certain amount of time with that silence, examining it, testing whether it feels like loss. It does, but not in the way I expected. What I lost wasn't the relationship. It was the version of the relationship I'd been maintaining through continuous compromise. The actual relationship, the one that existed when I stopped paying for access to it, turned out to be considerably smaller. There's a word people reach for when someone stops performing convenience. It tends to sound like a moral assessment. But a word used to stop a conversation isn't an argument, it's a signal that the person using it has run out of leverage. What I learned is that the moment you stop being useful to someone who has only ever needed your usefulness, they will name you the problem as though that changes the arithmetic. It doesn't. Have you ever realized too late that you'd been auditing everything around you clearly but kept refusing to look at your own column? And when you finally did, what did the numbers say?